This is the lecture for ancient and medieval history for Monday, the 13th of September, 2021. We begin with a handout that I have just given, which is a set of 2 exemplars. I don't think that's uniform, so please take the sweatshirt.
Okay. I've seen people do that, but I didn't know.
Depends on who and where. No big deal.
Right.
No problem.
All right.
What is an exemplar? Well, that's a fancy word for an example. Yeah, history's really complicated sometimes. For my European history students who use the same chapter survey system that you do, I picked out 2 of the best examples of a chapter survey that was turned in a week ago today. I normally don't do this. I usually wait until you guys turn in your first chapter surveys, and then I pick out the best 2 from all of the classes that do them and show you them. But I'm trying something out this year. I'm going to give you a chance to learn from another class's experiences. First of all, when I correct homework, I correct them with 1 good eye and 1 bad eye. My bad eye is a result of an accident by an optical surgeon when I was an infant. I was born cross-eyed, and when I was close to a year old, they did a corrective surgery, and he sliced the optic nerve almost clean through on the left side. So I have sort of vague vision on this side where I can see that there's a bright object moving. There's a giant blind spot right here. Basically, I use my right eye. And my right eye, as you can see, I wear glasses. It's not for my left eye. That's uncorrectable. It's for my right eye. So unlike my wife, and unlike many of you, I don't read quickly. I also don't speed read. So what I do is, with homework, I pick certain sections that I am going to look at closely. And I then infer quality based on those sections. They change from week to week. They may even change from class period to class period. I basically look at what I consider to be a fair random sampling, and that's what I grade on the basis of. You will notice here that there is an example on the front and back page, and there's another example in the 2 middle pages. Now, you will see that there is handwriting that you have to decipher if you want to read and understand what these people did. But what they did is, in those sections that I randomly sampled, they provided me with a sufficient level of detail to answer the question well. Now, some people have asked, well, aren't you grading for somebody writing a lot of information really small? Yeah, I am, partially. If you write nonsense really small, I'll pick up on it. I may not pick up on it immediately, but I almost always do, sooner or later. And I can retroactively regrade old assignments. I had somebody a few years ago try turning in the same essay for 5 chapter surveys. I eventually picked up on it, and I demanded those old chapter surveys back, and I retroactively degraded them because the person cheated. I expect a certain sized answer. And that means I am looking for a certain amount of detail. The spaces that I provide for you to write indicate the sort of detail I am looking for. So, do I expect you to fill the space? Yeah. Do I expect you to write small? Well, maybe I do. But not so tiny that I require a magnifying glass or a microscope to read it. If an electron microscope is required, then it's something I'm not even going to grade. It's just a bunch of lines. Maybe it's binary. Take the time to thoughtfully answer the question. And if you read bits of these exemplars, you will get a sense of what I think a good essay is. In fact, or a good answer is in the case of the document analyses. Are they perfect? No. Who is? But they're A work, even A plus work, as far as I'm concerned for the first unit. So now you have an idea, weeks in advance of when your thing is due, or a week in advance, of what I'm looking for. Presumably, you will take the time, because of your own self-interest, to look this over and shape your work to something like this standard. If you do, if you don't, you take your chances. Any questions? You might also rightly ask, well, what if I just happen to do one answer poorly and that's the answer you grade? Don't do any part of it any more poorly than the rest. Try to have a consistent level of quality throughout. And if there is something that I miss when I'm grading, you are welcome to come by later, sometime when we both have free time, and bring the subject up. I promise you, if you walk in, why'd you give me this grade? I will kick you out. I will not help you. And in fact, I will go out of my way to reward you for showing such blatant disrespect to the position and to the situation. I have had to criticize my boss every job I've had, including this one, because my boss missed something that I happened to notice. And I never approach him angrily or self-righteously. I recommend that if you want something, that you approach me respectfully, straightforward, not kowtow, not cringing, not anything like that, but just, Mr. Genorio, I noticed something that you might not have noticed. You take a second look here, look at this. This is what I saw. I'll look it over, and I may disagree with your interpretation, in which case I'll say, well, yeah, but this is why it earned the grade it did. Or, oh, I didn't notice that. Let me regrade it. We are going to be reasonable with one another about things like this. But I am not capable of reading everything that you write and closely correcting. Some of my colleagues do. I don't. I don't even pretend to. I let you know how I correct things, which is what I'm doing right now. Are you sure there are no questions? Okay. Yes?
This isn't really about like this. I was wondering for like the third doc.
Can you slow down and speak up, please?
I was saying it's not really about how like writing it, but I was wondering if we have to do like the third doc because we don't really have.
You have a third doc.
Okay, I was wondering.
You don't? Yeah. The third document is any document from Chapter 1, other than the opposed views. The opposed views in Chapter 1, I believe, include the story of the flood regarding Noah from Genesis and from the Gilgamesh epic. So your third document is any of those parchment-colored things from anywhere else in the chapter. You pick. There are some interesting documents there. And the age of those documents alone make them fascinating because these are people who lived an entirely different lifestyle than we did. So you pick something that interests you and you do the third document in the same analytical form. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir.
What are we supposed to do for stapling?
You print the map, you complete the map, and you staple it to the back.
Okay.
Now, on the bottom of the second page side, you will see the chapter numbers listed that include maps. Not all chapters include maps. Chapter 1 does. So print the map and do that. Also, if for whatever reason the printed copy I gave you has a problem with the map, I don't think it does. I looked it over, but the one I gave to the European history students did have a problem. Then look up the one online. because the picture, the scans of the pages that I included in your Google Classroom, those should be clear. Okay. Anything else?
No, that's
Okay. Any other questions? It would be wise for you, again, to budget between 4 and 6 hours to do this. Luckily, you have several weeks. Well, you have about 1 week more, but you've already had a chance to get started. It would also be wise if you were to start this thing before this weekend, because I don't check my email over the weekend, nor do I check it after I leave here. I like to compartmentalize my life. So don't count on being able to reach me Sunday afternoon when you're doing this, because you won't. Do something from every section this week before Thursday or Friday so that you can come in and show me what you're concerned about or what you're curious about, and I will try to give you a clarification. I'll try to help. Remember also, Study Lab is the best time for that. That is one of the things Study Lab is for. If you want to consult with me, come by and get a Study Lab pass. I'll write it for you, and we will conference about it. We'll talk about it together. Okay, so that's it for homework. Now we continue with our story. We had, so you have your notes out to page 2, and we were at 1,000 years BC, Philistines and King David. We talked about the arrival of the peoples of the sea. Now, the name Philistine was taken on by the Arabs who moved into Israel after the Jews were kicked out by the Romans and after the Muslim conquests. They are now called Philistines. So to some extent, the fight between Philistines and Israelites 3,000 years ago is continuing now between Palestinians, not Philistines, and Israelis, not Israelites. But this is both true, but only to a point, not entirely true. The Philistines and the Palestinian Arabs are not particularly the same thing. They have some relation. There probably is some blood connection, but the Palestinians are Arabs. Also, until about 100 and, let's see, it's 2021, until about 104 years ago, there was nothing particular to distinguish the Arabs of Palestine from the Arabs of Transjordan or the Arabs of Syria or any other group of Arabs. The notion that there was a Palestinian nation before 1917, when the British invited the Jews to come to Palestine, is nonsense. Culturally, and we'll go into that later, but since we're dealing with names. Palestinians, as a subset of Arabs with a distinct culture, developed over the last 104 years as a result of the Jewish settlement and the particular history that those Arabs experienced. But they are not an old nation. They are a very new one. Nation being a group of people with a distinct identity. Questions, comments, or thoughts before we go on? Okay. David, the shepherd boy who winged Goliath with a sling stone, as king of the Jews, extends the borders of Israel all the way to Egypt, so it includes the Sinai Peninsula, and all the way up into Syria, even to the shores of the upper Euphrates River. This is the only time in all of recorded history that the Jewish people were a conquering people up until the modern era, where Israel is a very strong country militarily compared to its Arab neighbors. But when David dies, the kingdom has a period sort of a golden age under Solomon, and I told you that Solomon was epically famous for his wealth and his wisdom. And the last thing that we talked about on Friday was the proverbial wisdom of King Solomon, where you have the classic case of two women squabbling. I call it squabbling. This is life and death for a mother over whose child this particular baby is. Is it her child or her child? And the king does not have any hard evidence one way or the other. One of them probably miscarried. Both of them are nursing or are capable of nursing. Both of them show signs of being recently pregnant. So, how to decide? Would somebody remind me, please, how Solomon makes his decision between the two? Dan.
So he's told the guard to cut the baby into half, and then the real mom said to take her instead because she said that the baby was the other person, but they could tell because she cried out for the baby.
Right. And the truth is, I don't even know if that was the biological mother, nor does Solomon. What we know is this. In that moment, the woman who said, not my baby, don't harm a hair on that baby's head, harm me if you must harm anyone, that lady cared more about the child's welfare than she did about winning the argument. Folks, you should appreciate just how important it is for human beings to win an argument. It is one of the great weaknesses of human nature. We get wedded to the idea of wanting to be right and wanting the other guy to be wrong. And we will often, and I say we because I'm guilty of this too, I try not to be, but I'm a human, I fail. We dig our heels in about something because it's no longer about what is right in the circumstance, it's about winning and losing. And we do not want to be losers. We want to be winners. And as such, we will argue or fight to hold our position, even if our position is wrong, even if our position is petty. We want to win. For a person in such a public situation to overcome all of that for the sake of love of a child, that's a person who should be the mother. That's the wisdom. It doesn't matter who the biological mother is. It matters who will mother that child well. It's like adoption. Adoption is older than humanity, if you believe in evolution. Or adoption is one of the oldest institutions that people have if you are a creationist. Heck, Romulus and Remus were adopted by a she-wolf for a season, kept alive by suckling her milk. Adoption is grand and glorious. It allows people who are giving birth, who are not ready to be parents, to give the child to somebody who is. But for adoption to work, you've got to honor it. The birth parents can't come back 10 years later and say, I want the kid back, it's mine. No, it's not. It was yours, you gave it up for the good of the child. Now, if you would like to be a part of that child's life, you respectfully go to the adopted family. You do not just break in, because that disrupts the child's well-being. The child deserves a home. The child deserves security, and the adopting parents are giving all that, presumably. Okay. After this period of golden age, Israel declines and actually splits into the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. Kingdom of Israel is in the north, kingdom of Judah is in the south around Jerusalem. Might as well put Jerusalem on here since it's kind of an important city, just a little bit as far as history goes. But let's see too far. Here we go. It's basically Jerusalem. The Dead Sea and the Gulf South as we talk. So, as Israel is divided into Israel and Judah, this creates opportunities for the neighbors. Now, one of the problems of Israel is that it is on a world crossroads. Anyone who wants to walk from Asia to Africa or from Africa to Asia has to go through Israel. And that means that conquerors want to control that territory because it is a crossroads. So, in Mesopotamia, there are a series of empires. There's Sumer, there's Akkad, there's the first Babylonian Empire under King Hammurabi. There are the Assyrians, the Hittites, and then there are the Neo-Babylonians, the New Babylonian Empire. And the New Babylonian Empire achieves its strength close to 600 years before the birth of Christ. And it is expanding out from Mesopotamia, across Syria, into and towards Egypt. It takes Judah. It takes Israel in the north. The Babylonians then march on Jerusalem in the south. The Jews of Jerusalem make an alliance with Egypt. They strengthen the walls. The prophet of God at that time says, "You false fools are trusting human beings when you should trust God. The only way through this is to trust God." The kings of Judah say, "Yeah, that's great, but they've got spears. And so we're going to try to build walls and build alliances. That doesn't mean we're not trusting God. The prophet disagrees." So Jerusalem is surrounded and Jerusalem is taken by the Babylonians. Now, the Babylonians have won. And whenever the Babylonians win a war, they say that their heroic god, Marduk, has beaten the gods of their defeated enemies. So, as far as the Babylonians are concerned, Marduk has defeated Yahweh. The great temple of Solomon to God is converted to a temple of Marduk. The worship of Yahweh is outlawed. The worship of Marduk is required by law. It's a mandate. It's a requirement. The king of Babylon didn't get on TV and demand it, but he did proclaim, and all of his officials know it. Marduk beat Yahweh, but the Jews don't go along with this. The Jews continue worshiping Yahweh. They refuse to worship Marduk. "But we won! That's not fair," the Babylonians say. "We beat you. We couldn't have beat you if Marduk hadn't beaten Yahweh. Worship Marduk." "No." "You won't worship Marduk?" "No," say the Jews. "Oh, well, guess we can't force you to." "Wait a second. Maybe we can force you to. We're going to take the population of the city of Jerusalem and the rest of the Jews nearby on a trip to Babylon forever. And when you get to Babylon, you will be our slaves. And we're going to do things to you that we think are amusing, like lock you in a cave and feed nothing but pig meat and see what you do. You Jews have a kosher food requirement. You can't eat pig meat, can ya? Can ya? So you got a choice. You can be holy and starve to death. You can go cannibal, which is its own form of horror, taboo, mortal sin. Or you can eat the meat of a pig. Let's see what happens after 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 weeks. The Babylonians do stuff like that. They take the people of Israel, who are stiff-necked and refuse to worship Marduk, which they should do because they lost the war, and they go out of their way to torture them. This is the time of the prophet Daniel. And Daniel is said to have visions of the future. Daniel's famous saying when somebody asks him to interpret visions or to give some kind of prescient vision of the future, to be an oracle, is, "Don't ask me if you don't want me to tell you the truth. Don't ask me and then expect me to give you good news. If you ask me, I'll tell you. But I'll tell you what I know, not what you want to hear." King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon appreciates this. But his advisors say that Daniel is a false prophet, working for evil, and that he's also a shyster and a trickster and a liar. So, famously, Daniel is thrown into a pen, a cage, a set of caves with a bunch of hungry lions. And the way the Babylonians know they're hungry is the Babylonians feed the lions. and they hadn't fed the lions for a few days before they put Daniel in there. And the question is, can Daniel last a night in the lion's den without getting eaten? The next morning, Daniel walks out. Lions are there. Daniel's there. He earns some street cred. He earns some face. So the Jews are in the Babylonian captivity from 597 BC through 539 BC. What happens? Well, east of Mesopotamia is Iran, the Iranian Peninsula, where the Aryan people come from. The Aryans, the Iranians. The Iranians, who come from, so here's Israel, here's Mesopotamia, here's the Zagros Mountains, and here's Iran, the high plateau of Iran. These guys are people of the horse. The Iranians are the first people to actually ride horse cavalry into battle in large numbers. The Iranians, the Persian Empire, the first Persian Empire, conquers the second Babylonian Empire. Cyrus, king of the Persians, conquers Babylon. And when he does so, he frees the Jews. The Persians are unlike the Babylonians. Look, when you win a fight, you can be gracious or you can be graceless about it. A graceless person is a perpetual bully. I beat you, I beat you, I beat you, I beat you. Stop slapping your face with your own hand. Stuff like that. A perpetual bully, the kind of bully that you cannot appease. That's the Babylonians, worship Marduk. It's not the Persians. The Persians say, go home. Cyrus the Great says to the Jews, go home. Send me earth and water as a sign of your submission. Worship whoever you want. Build a temple. Have fun. Follow my laws, and I won't make too many. Pay your taxes. Send troops when I need them. Do these things, and you will be happily a part of the Persian Empire. The Persians were wise and graceful, gracious conquerors. As such, Cyrus the Great is considered to be an agent of the Lord God Almighty, even though he was a Zoroastrian, not a Jew. Cyrus the Great believed not in many gods and not in one God. Zoroastrians are dualists. That does not mean they fight a lot of honor battles. Dualists in a different sense. How many gods would a dualist worship? This is an easy question. Yeah?
2.
2. Dual, 2 gods. Persian Zoroastrians believe in a Lord of Light, Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord Ormazd, and an equal and opposite Lord of Darkness, Ahriman, Angramayni, the Dark Lord. Our universe is a result of the matter of Ormazd and the antimatter of Ahriman. Ahura Mazda meets Ahriman, light meets darkness, and boom! The explosion is our universe. Everything. Earth, air, fire, water, animals, plants, us, everything is part of this explosion that is the world, created when light and darkness meet. And they're equal and opposite, and they explode just like matter and antimatter would. But explosions don't last. Sooner or later, they stabilize. A Zoroastrian believes that every decision that we make, including you want fries with that, has a moral component to it. And that ultimately a critical mass of good or evil choices will tilt the world into perpetual light and heaven, or into ultimate darkness, chaos, hell. We not only determine the fate of our own souls by our choices, which monotheists believe, we, dualists believe, Zoroastrians believe, determine the very fate of the universe itself by our choices. Cyrus believes in that, not Yahweh. But because Cyrus frees the Jews from the Babylonian captivity and allows them to go home and worship Yahweh, He is considered to be a righteous Gentile, an ally of the Jews, an agent of God. And Cyrus is actually a hero in Jewish history because of what he does. So now the Jews are under the Persian Empire. And that's fine. The Persians and the Jews actually get along very well. In Jewish history, the Persian period is considered to be a happy time. However, the Persians aspire to universal empire. And in the service to this universal empire, this idea of an empire whose borders are human borders, in other words, an empire of mankind, an illimited empire, an empire of the whole world. In other words, the Persians want and expect to conquer the world and bring it all under Persian rule. They're not going to be the first or the last to want to do this. In the course of this, they try to conquer Greece. We're going to spend a lot of time in Unit 2 during the second quarter talking about that. Here's a spoiler. They fail. They try and fail to conquer Greece, the Persians do. For a few hundred, well, a couple 300 years, the Persians and the Greeks have this uneasy peace between them. Greece is independent from Persia, and Persians are no longer trying to conquer Greece because it's too difficult. Then Greece gets conquered after a series of civil wars by Philip of Macedon, a barbarian from north of Greece. He gets assassinated, and his teenage son Alexander becomes the leader of Greece. He kills the assassins and realizes that the only thing that will unify the Greeks is an outside enemy. It's like today. There are a bunch of people who believe in world peace and that the world can unify. Yeah, you know when the world will unify? When flying saucers land and try to conquer us. When we have a common enemy. At that point, humanity will unify. Until then, don't expect it. We are a fractious, factionalized species. We do not all want to be slaves to one man's vision. We do not all want to be part of the Chinese Communist Party, and not everyone wants to be part of the American Republic. Not everyone wanted to be under the British or the French or the Mongol empires. We resist globalism, globalization, and world empire. Like the Greeks, what would unify us is a common enemy. Aliens. Unfortunately, any alien capable of crossing interstellar distance to come here, unless we are doing the same thing and we meet them in the stars, is going to be inherently more advanced than we are technologically, because right now we can't fathom anything that would pass through this universe faster than the speed of light. And while 186,000 miles a second may seem really fast to us on Earth by the standards of even the solar system, well, the sun is 8 light minutes away. It's slow. In any event, Alexander unifies Greece in his father's great project to pay Persia back, to conquer Persia and bring it into the Greek world. In a dozen years, Alexander marches east in a series of battles still studied by military historians. He breaks through the Asia Minor borderlands. He then goes south across Syria and through Israel into Egypt, takes Egypt, and then goes east to fight near Ctesiphon, the Persian capital in Mesopotamia, and then beyond into Persia. Alexander even reaches the edge of Afghanistan, and he invades northern India, what we now call Pakistan. He does this with a unified Greek army. He does this with a brilliancy as a general that is only approached by Napoleon in later years. Alexander the Great conquers the known world. He becomes the only man in history to be Lord of East and Lord of West simultaneously. In other words, he rules the most powerful European or Western nation simultaneous to ruling the most powerful Asiatic or Eastern nation. Because at that time, Persia is the most powerful in the east, Greece in the west. Alexander rules both simultaneously. Like Jesus Christ, he dies at age 33, dies young. But he has conquered the world. And for the next few hundred years, the Greeks rule this part of the world, including Israel. Here's the problem. Have you ever had two friends that each in their own separate circles are the bright shining center of the universe? Have you ever had a friend that has to be the most dynamic person in the room, the natural leader? I've had several people in my life that have this sense of themselves that they are the main character and everyone around them is their supporting character, their sidekick. What's fun, if you're evil, like me, is to get these people from their different worlds together in a room and lock them in and see what happens. Bright shining center, beam, beam, flare, flare. What's going to happen? Who's going to be supreme? Are they both basically going to ignore one another and still be the bright shining center of the universe, which is a little psychotic? Or are they going to fight it out and one will win and one will lose? Or is one going to submit? Or are they going to become friends and team up and try to take over the world together, like in a game of Risk, until the moment inevitably comes to backstab? What will happen? What will almost certainly happen is they're not going to get along at first, because they're not going to give in to the other person's vanity. They're not going to cater to it. They're both alphas. The Jews may not be a strong people. They may not be a rich people, but they are the one true God's chosen people. They are God's gift to the world. They know it. So they may lose wars. They may be on the edge of starvation. They may suffer. They may sin. They may screw up. But in the end, there is this pride in being a part of God's chosen people that cannot be denied. That's the Jews. The Greeks invented philosophy, geometry, physics, democracy, theater, comedy, tragedy, drama. They are the most creativist and cleverest people ever. Just ask them. They'll tell you. So much of our civilization originated with them. They developed idealized realistic art. The Greeks are the most creative people ever. Bright shining center of the universe. The Jews are God's chosen people. Bright shining center of the universe. You got to keep them separated because they don't like each other. Both of them have this vanity about them, which they think is justified. The Persians didn't have that. They just wanted to rule. But the Greeks insist, like the Babylonians did, that the Jews assimilate to their culture. That means worshiping the Olympians rather than Yahweh. How do you think this is going to work out? Forcing the Jews to not be Jews anymore. Well, about 100 years before Christ, something amazing happens. Judas Maccabee and his brother take up arms against the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire is a world empire. It is the empire of the East. It is the most powerful successor state to Alexander's empire. The Greek Empire has armies, it has navies, it has a war and peacetime economy, it has culture, it has siege engines, it has the whole panoply of national power of a superpower of that age. Judas Maccabee has a bunch of mountain boys and city boys willing to go out and engage in banditry and guerrilla warfare against the Greeks. Logically, there is no way that the Maccabees can beat the Greeks. Logically, it is as foolish as today. If you look at the balance sheet of forces today, the United States of America is the world empire. We have nuclear carrier groups. We have atomic missiles, a space program. Not as good as it used to be, but still a space program. We've got an Air Force, a Navy, a Marine Corps, even a Coast Guard to join with our Army. We have weapons smarter than many people. Bombs that can blow out the side of a building that has an anti-aircraft gun without hitting too many of the orphans on the other side of the building. We are the center of the world economy, the center of the global internet. The United States is the Middle Kingdom of our time, the Central human empire. And yet, a bunch of savages who say, Allahu Akbar, God is great, have taken up arms against us. For the last 20 years, they have fought us openly. They have fought us in combat, as well as through terrorism. There is no logical way that they could win. And yet, it wasn't them that pulled out of Afghanistan, leaving thousands of its own people behind. That was us. It wasn't them that pulled out of Iraq without achieving proper victory. What Maccabees said, and what our terrorist enemies say today, is that if God is with us, who can stand against us? It doesn't matter what the balance sheet says. It doesn't matter how many forces the enemy has. They are like a giant redwood tree, seemingly indestructible from the outside, but the redwood is rotten within. The only thing holding it up is its bark. You break through the outer bark, even if it seems like a hopeless task, and the redwood comes crashing down. So it is with the Americans. So it is with the Greeks. So it is with the world empire. They seem unstoppable, but inside they are rotten to the core, and that rot is our friend. If God is with us, who can stand against us? It's not a question of calculating the risk. It's a question of doing the right thing, of putting yourself in harm's way for a righteous cause and trusting in God for the rest. I may die in 5 minutes, I may die in what seems like a futile gesture, but God will find a way to bring victory. Allahu Akbar, God is great. That is what drove the Maccabees, and they won. They kicked the Greeks out of Israel. Now this is going to echo through the next couple hundred years. The Maccabees had no likelihood of winning. They had no logical chance. And yet, God gave them victory. If God is on our side, who can be against us? You need to understand this. Not only about the history back then, but about the war on terror today. We have all the advantages, except most Americans would rather the war on terror go away than be won. That is why we left Iraq without a job being done. That is why the decision was made to leave Afghanistan. It is not why the decision was made to leave Afghanistan incompetently. That was somebody else's gratuitous choice. Our enemies, if they win this war, they could. We could lose. Most Americans can't imagine us actually losing a war and having it matter to us. Not since World War II did Americans worry about being conquered. Well, we could be. And if we are, it's because of something wrong in us. We had all the possibilities of winning. Still lost. Go figure. The Maccabees example echoes through the time of Jesus, and it echoes through the modern world too. Except instead of being Jews, today's Maccabees, are Islamist terrorists. Any questions, comments, or thoughts before I go into the next phase? Okay. Seeing none. The Greeks are kicked out, but the Romans march east. Pompey the Great conquers Jerusalem. Pompey the Great is a colleague of Gaius Julius Caesar. Pompey the Great brings his horse into the Holy of Holies of the Jewish temple. The Jewish temple is built in concentric rings. They're rectangles, but basically they're rings. There is the court of the Gentiles, where anyone can go, and the Jewish temple is a tourist attraction. So anyone, Jew or non-Jew, can go to the court of the Gentiles. Then there is the court of the women, where female Jews are allowed to go and make sacrifice and pray. Then there is the court of the men, where male Jews are allowed to go to sacrifice and pray. You've got to go through these, through the court of the Gentiles, through the court of the women, through the court of the men, to the court of the priests, where only the Jewish priests, who are descendants of Moses' brother Aaron, can go. And within the court of the priest, surrounded by a silken barrier, is the Holy of Holies, which is where the most holy relics of Israel are kept. At one time, the Ark of the Covenant was kept. It's where God himself enters the world. And the only human being allowed to enter is the high priest of the Jews, the leader of the Sanhedrin, on the high holy days. That's it. Otherwise, it is forbidden. Everyone. Pompey, the Roman general, slices the silk barrier, brings his horse in, and has his horse urinate and defecate all over the Holy of Holies. Why? To demonstrate that Yahweh isn't going to save the Jews. The Jews get placed under the rule of an Idumean, somebody who has some Jewish blood but who is not fully Jewish, named Herod the Great. King Herod the Great, works for the Romans. He is a Roman client. His country is a Roman colony, indirectly ruled through Herod. Now, when Herod the Great dies around the time of Jesus' birth, his kingdom is divided among his descendants, those that he didn't kill. Because Herod was great, and his family was great for incestuous relationships between father and daughter, between brother and sisters. And Herod routinely kills his own offspring and his own grandchildren because he doesn't want anyone to threaten his power. When he finally dies, his kingdom is divided up. The north goes to a guy named Herod Antipas, who's going to be around when Jesus is doing his ministry. The south is given to a descendant of Herod named Archelaus, who's an incompetent boob. And this incompetent boob, and it's not me who calls him this, it's history that calls him this. His rule is so incompetent that the Romans need to come in, get rid of Archelaus, and the Romans now rule the Judea area, the area around Jerusalem, directly. The Romans send in the 10th Legion, Praetenses, and they send in a Roman governor, a procurator general. And the Roman governor, who's pagan, is going to rule the Jews of Jerusalem in their holy city. In Jesus' time, the land is rife for civil war. Jesus, according to the Gospels, is born. He has to flee to Egypt to avoid one of Herod the Great's last acts, to kill all the boy children in Bethlehem, because Herod wants to destroy a Messiah that could overthrow his dynasty. Jesus then returns to Nazareth, which is a crossroads town overlooking the valley of Megiddo, which is Armageddon, and he grows up in a carpenter's household. Joseph, Mary's husband, is a carpenter, and Jesus learns the family business. until Jesus' younger brothers or younger family members are old enough, he works as a carpenter until he's 30. 30, by the way, in ancient times is old. He still has physical vigor, but most people, the average life expectancy in the time of Jesus is in the low 20s. In other words, half the people die before they're 24. Today, the average life expectancy of Americans is in the 70s. So the land of Israel is divided, and that's where we'll leave it to start the story of the ministry of Christ. Thank you. Come again.